And so we have, joining us now, Canada's Minister of Defence, Anita Anand. Minister, first of all, thank you for taking the time to speak with us. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Andrew.
Can I start with the simple fact that it was you who delivered this apology on the government's behalf? Wouldn't it have carried more weight if it was the Prime Minister apologizing?
Well, Andrew, I am the Minister of National Defence, and as the individual who has responsibility relating to the Canadian Armed Forces, it is wholly appropriate for me to be the one who delivers this apology. The Prime Minister is fully supportive of the apology and indeed cares very deeply about sexual misconduct and sexual harassment in the Canadian military. He and I have been working on this file together, and I will continue to be determined in the efforts and the approaches that we are implementing from time immemorial.
You know, we've heard from survivors that this isn't just about sexual assault. It's about changing the culture of inclusion within the military. So starting today, I mean, post-apology, what's the next step?
Well, let's be clear that the apology is one important step, but we have been working very hard, even before today, to ensure that there is a change in the culture of the Canadian military, as well as the Department of National Defence. For example, in Budget 2021, our government committed $236 million. Part of that is going to ensure that the sexual misconduct response center led by Dr. Preston has expanded resources. In addition, we will see the implementation of the Victims' Bill of Rights in 2022. And we also have Jenny Carignan working on professional conduct resources to ensure that those resources are in place for the Canadian Armed Forces.
When you talk about things like adding new rules or resources, I mean, does any of that actually go the distance in addressing the culture problem within the military? Because when you look at the number of people who filed complaints, just in the class action lawsuit, nearly 19,000 people, I mean, that number tells me more than just about a culture problem within the military. It's a culture crisis. I mean, what does that number tell you?
Well, it was 2015 when Madame Justice Deschamps indicated that there is a culture crisis in the Canadian military. So the number of 19,000 is high, but I agree with you, it does not reflect the overall cultural crisis in the Canadian military, and that's why the reforms that we are undertaking, some of which I have mentioned here, are so very important. This is not going to be fixed overnight. This is a process that we are undertaking, recognizing the importance and the gravity of the task, but understanding that there is no silver bullet to ensure that an overnight change occurs.
Minister, I have time just for one last question. When it comes to the transfer of cases of sexual misconduct from the military to civilian courts, I mean, you made that announcement just over a month ago. Has any case actually been transferred yet?
Andrew, I met with the Director of Military Prosecutions and the Provost Marshal who are overseeing the transfer of cases, and they are coordinating with their provincial and territorial counterparts to ensure that the transfer of cases occurs in the new year.
Okay, Minister, we'll leave it there. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it once again.
Thank you. Take care.
And so here to explain the significance of this apology is Megan MacKenzie, a professor at Simon Fraser University, a military culture specialist who I know has been following every terrible spasm of the story from the beginning. Thank you for joining us. I know you just heard the minister's interview. You heard her apology, and I'm curious, in all that you heard today, what's missing?
Well, I'm really grateful to hear the apology. I think it's an important acknowledgement. I do think it's an important step forward. One thing that I thought was missing was a focus on the responsibility of the Department of Defense and the CAF in terms of ensuring that perpetrators weren't in the system. So there was a lot of focus on a lack of trust and on the long-term harms for victims. And I think that's so important to acknowledge that. I think some of the language around, a scourge or a negative culture kind of evades the fact that this is an institution where perpetrators had very successful careers. And that's a difficult reality that really requires an apology, that it's not just that that victims weren't protected, but really that this was a workplace where perpetrators succeeded and thrived. And in some cases, we see rose to senior ranks. So I would have liked to have seen a little bit more attention to perpetrators and moving forward to how perpetrators will be dealt with.
And so in terms of the apology itself, what do you read into Prime Minister Trudeau not being the one to do it?
I mean, I agree with what the minister said, that she is the minister who's going to have to be actioning the way forward. And so I do think it makes sense to have her deliver this apology. I think it's important that we heard from the Prime Minister today. I think it would have been meaningful to have him join her today. But I also accept that she's the minister in charge of this portfolio.
Okay, as we step back a bit, part of what's fascinating about you is that you're leading this international study into sexual misconduct in several forces. So you have a sense of other militaries, and I'm curious, how unusual is Canada's crisis?
Well, what's unfortunate about the international context is that there is a very regular pattern of scandal and increased media attention, either because of a single high-profile case or a series of high-profile cases. And we see this over the past 3 decades. And so there's often an increased media attention, increased public concern, and some renewed commitments to change. And then often attention dies away and very little changes in between scandals. What's unusual about what's happening in Canada at the moment is the number of senior leaders embroiled in the scandals and the number of senior leaders who face allegations of misconduct. So that is very unprecedented. And I think it's also in the international context of sort of the Me Too movement and global conversations about sexual misconduct and workplace culture.
Professor Megan MacKenzie, thank you so much for your insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.